Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this very insightful conversation that I'm looking forward to having, and thank you all for coming. You know, this topic is so interesting to me because as a millennial, I don't fully understand it, but I look to my parents and I see that they're starting to get to an age where they're thinking about retirement. And I'm learning that there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. And I'm learning that from them, their friends, my aunts and uncles. So I'm going to put this question to you all just broadly, and you can each answer it. What, in your minds, are some of the most unique challenges that are facing Americans who are 50 years or older? I'll start with you, Michael.
Sure. Well, you know, clearly one of the big challenges that older folks are facing is having the financial wherewithal to enter into the later years and to live in a healthy and vibrant way as we age. And this is certainly one of the challenges. Another that I would lift up is the challenge of maintaining a social connection. You know, we have serious challenges with social isolation among older people in this country, and so those certainly, financial security and maintaining social connection, seem to me to be two very important areas for us to focus on.
Absolutely. And Marianne, obviously as the president of NACO, you have a very interesting background dealing with this in terms of how it impacts communities and how communities can get involved. What's your experience with that?
So counties actually are very instrumental in the services that we provide to our older Americans. And counties fund the Older Americans Act through our Office on Aging. But the financial issues are important, but the isolation, but also the mental health of our elderly. Because when you think of their retirement and you think that they still want to stay socially involved, financially vibrant, but they're also alone a lot of times. And so we have to be very cognizant of what mental health issues we need to provide them and have access for them.
Absolutely. And Joe, from your perspective, what are the most unique challenges that you're seeing in these communities?
Well, being able to plan in advance for our aging communities and ensuring that it's inclusive as we're planning, it's equitable and inclusive. Through my colleague here, Karen Freeman-Wilson, and National League of Cities, with the partnership of AARP, we were able to elevate the importance of planning for our older neighbors in a way that it's equitable and fair. And we were able to do that through our Love My City campaign. And cities now across the country, 19,000 cities, towns, and villages that we represent, are able to pivot towards what we were able to accomplish this last year.
Absolutely. And just for clarification, so Karen, you used to hold Joe's position. Is that correct? Yes.
Joe is the new Karen.
The new Karen. There we go.
I'm the old Joe.
Okay.
Whichever way you want to say
now
it.
we have him for the record. So, Karen, you're obviously working at the Urban League of Chicago right now. From your experience, you know, with that broader question of what challenges Americans 50 years and older are facing, how are you seeing that play out in Chicago?
So the first thing I want to do is be very clear, because I'm 59. So when you say 50 and older, I am not old. So anybody that wants to, so we are older, but I'm not old.
Right.
But in all seriousness, it's the issue of relevance. Joe mentioned planning, right? And people think about how they're going to navigate this territory, but even the best plans don't totally prepare you. As an example, I help my mother, who's 83, her sister, who's 80, navigate healthcare. You can't plan for that,
right?
Because it is, when you talk about just a tangled web, it absolutely is. And I think that's where our cities have the ability, and quite frankly, government has the ability to help us. And it doesn't seem like a role, but so many don't have family members who are in a position or who will take the time to help. And so that's where we can step in. But also, when I talked about relevance, helping them to feel like there is still something that we need them to do and that we want them to do. And I think that's so important for the intergenerational opportunities that exist for not just folks that are 50 and older, but for the younger people who can learn from us.
Absolutely. Marianne, you brought up a very interesting point just now about mental health and what organizations are doing to help this particular age group of Americans deal with mental health and, you know, their future. How is NACO getting involved in that, and how important is it to address mental health with this age group?
So as president of the association this year, the president gets to pick an initiative. And if you look at, by 2035, our 60-year and older population is going to exceed our 18-year-olds. And so that got me started to really think and look at what we were doing in terms of our counties across the country and what issues we have to look at. And if you look at the mental health issue, we have focused on our mental health in jails. We have focused on our children and our adolescents. And now I think it's time that we really start to focus on our elderly. So looking at those programs. So through our Office on Aging, which again, counties are, they govern the Office on Aging in sometimes their own county or else in a regional setup. And those are programs that through our senior centers that we really take and participate in to make sure that we have, and they know that there are resources out there for them for mental health services.
Absolutely. Michael, you work with a specific part of this age group, the LGBTQ community. Talk about the unique challenges that members of this community in this age group face and how your organization and other organizations are preparing them to face these challenges and really overcome them.
Sure, and the context, I think, for that conversation is that we all know that our life experiences impact and shape our aging experience. And so people from different communities, whether it's LGBT folks, people of color, LGBT elders of color, are going to have different experiences later in life. What we see in terms of the work that we do with LGBTQ older adults are, among other things, very high levels of social isolation and thin support networks. That comes substantially from the fact that LGBT folks of the generations we work with are much less likely to be parents, right? Much less likely to be parents, much more likely to grow old, single, and living alone. And because of historical discrimination, much more likely to be disconnected from their families of origin. So there are serious gaps there when it comes to social connection and support. Those gaps create a greater need for services, a greater need for professionalized care. But unfortunately, even in this day and age, we still find a combination of discrimination and perhaps even more than discrimination, a lack of information and knowledge to provide that care and those services in competent and effective ways. And so as a national organization, SAGE works with our affiliates and programs all across the country and with many partners to try to address those issues. And you could think of that as happening in a sense in two tracks. One of those tracks is creating spaces and programs that are specifically designed for LGBTQ older adults to help address their needs. But the solutions at the end of the day will come more significantly from opening up the spaces that already exist for all older people and making them accessible and welcoming for LGBT folks. So a number of years ago, we launched in partnership with the Administration for Community Living, the National Resource Center on LGBT aging that provides those resources. And we run a national training program called SAGE Care that has trained, at this point, more than 60,000 care providers across the country. So it's that combination of creating specified programs, but really the kind of work we need to do to open up all programs to make them welcoming for every older adult, including LGBT folks.
Absolutely. And Joe, could you talk to me about some of the initiatives that NLC is implementing to prioritize the needs of this age group in particular?
Yeah, cities, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, we are the laboratories for innovation and housing. For us in the National League of Cities, representing over 200 million Americans in this country, housing is a critical issue for us in cities to ensure that we have affordable housing opportunities for those who are aging in place. In Los Angeles, it was mentioned that we have a homeless problem. We just opened a bridge home, which is an emergency temporary shelter in Watts in my district. And nearly half of the residents there are seniors. I met Laverne Green, who we highlighted not too long ago when Mayor Pete Buttigieg visited our bridge home site. She shared with us that she was once a nurse. She cared for others. That was her career. A nasty divorce ended up forced her to live in her car for the last year and a half, and now she has found this Bridge Home site is now looking for a new job. I think about my 99-year-old grandmother, who will turn 100 this year, my Nonna Serena. Thank God that she has my mom and my aunts and my uncle, that she's able to rotate and have a place to stay and be around her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, and her great-great-grandchildren. Wow. But my Nonna is blessed. There are others that at her age and who don't have a place to go. As an LAPD officer, I can tell you for 15 years working the streets, I've seen individuals who, because they weren't able to afford rent, afford housing, died on a sidewalk. So as National League of Cities and as a president in 2020, I'll be focusing on elevating the discussion of housing and homelessness for all generations, particularly our senior communities.
Absolutely. Karen, you also served as the mayor of Gary, Indiana. You know, I'd love to hear, what you did in that community to improve the intergenerational bonds there. And, just talk to us a little bit about Gary. I've never been there. I know it from the musical, The Music Man, I believe. Yes.
Gary, Indiana, that's right.
But, yeah, talk to us about that, because I believe it's a bit of a smaller town.
It is.
And
We
such.
have about 80,000 people. Still the steel capital of the Midwest, if not the U.S., because U.S. Steel's flagship plant is there. One of the things that we understood was the importance of having seniors feel like their wisdom, their experience was valued. And so we did a couple of things. The first is we created a senior summit. And we did it for 3 years and just brought them together, not just to talk about healthcare, but a lot of the conversation was about healthcare, but it also encouraged them to be civically engaged. And so we talked about volunteerism and how we needed their input and their help. In addition to that, we learned about their gifts and talents. And so it allowed them to be mentors. And so often we think about mentoring with young people, 18 and younger. But, all of us at some point in our lives, even up until the point that we become 80 or 90, can use a mentor around certain subject matters. So if there's a new business owner in the community, as an example, we were able to pair seniors who had run businesses successfully or who had lost businesses, because that's experience as well. To talk to them and say, hey, you know what? These are some of the pitfalls. These are some of the ways that you can make your experience easier. We were also able to do that around our urban gardening, urban farming work, to get young people and older people involved with gardening, with raising goats, things like that. Now, the mayor goes to a lot of those things. I didn't go to the goat exhibit, but I went to the urban gardening part. But so those are some of the things, because it allows our young people to begin to value our seniors, and then it allows our seniors to understand that you are far from out of the game.
Absolutely. I hear that goat yoga is now very popular.
Well, you can tell me about it.
I'll tell you all about it.
Karen, if I can, Karen reminds me when we're planning as city leaders, county leaders on infrastructure and green infrastructure. Not too long ago in my district, we actually had a huge community celebration, adding our first skate park in a community that I represent, Harbor City. And it was a youth-led initiative. But an older lady came up to me, God bless her soul. She goes, this is great for the kids, but when are you putting in my community garden?
Yeah.
And I go, yes, ma'am, it's coming, right? So as we plan and lead we have the more inclusive of all generations.
Absolutely.
You know, one group that I'd really like to pick your brains about are veterans. It seems that, you know, and especially in terms of veterans and homelessness, especially veterans in this age group, it seems to be a big issue for that particular group. Are your organizations doing a lot to work with veterans in particular, and veterans who are getting older and maybe don't have access to, you know, resources that some other Americans might have?
So yes, and actually as you're talking, it was like great partnerships here that I'm thinking about to do between the counties and the cities, and programs that the veterans can get involved in terms of our foster grandparent programs that counties run through, again, our Office on Aging or our senior companions, because again, you have populations that are isolated and don't have anybody else, they don't have family. That again, those individuals can be trained and then go to be the companion for others. And so veterans definitely is a group that we are looking at and trying to figure out how do we mesh those programs to include them as well. And then the other population is our aging population of those that are in our jails and prisons. So again, if you just think of the number of individuals that will be reaching that age group, we have a lot, if not all, of our services that we provide both within the counties and the cities to that population.
You know, that is an excellent example, and that's one of the things that we do at the Chicago Urban League. We have a focus on housing, but we also understand that, as a number of folks have talked about, sometimes you just don't have the information. And being a community-based organization and being right in the community, we are able to connect veterans to the housing needs that they have, to the healthcare needs that they have. And so while there are a lot of opportunities, they don't always know about them. They have to know about them.
And we have at SAGE, actually, we have a program called SAGE Vets, and one of the things that we see is that, unfortunately, because of discrimination against LGBT people in the military historically, we have many LGBT folks who have served in the military but are not accessing desperately needed veterans benefits. I mean, this is one of the great things, is that we do have a good system of veterans health and veterans benefits. And so we do a lot of work to try to connect people to their benefits, and also really allow our veterans who come from our communities to reclaim that sense of pride from their service that unfortunately was denied for them for a long time.
I just want to let our audience know in about a minute or so, we'll have time for about 5 minutes of Q&A. So think of those questions if you have any in particular, and we will get to you then. Another group I would like to talk about is women, and how, you know, women are dealing with, you know, the idea of, you know, issues like retirement and, you know, planning for this next stage in their life. How is maybe it different for women than it is for men? And I'll pose it to the whole group.
Well, one of the ways it's different is that women still tend to live a lot longer, particularly in the African American community. Right. And so you have women who are widows or who may have never married, who are trying to navigate what they're going to do. Housing isn't getting any cheaper. They don't always have the option of living with their children or with other people. And so to the extent that assisted living and the housing opportunities that Joe talked about, those become extremely important. And that's how cities and counties and organizations can really come together around them with, you know, with housing opportunities, but also with socialization opportunities. And so that's one of the ways.
Absolutely. And you know, as women, we tend to be going into the role as caregiver. And so again, my initiative was also brought on because of a personal experience that I became a caregiver for both of my parents. My daddy has stage 4 lymphoma and many heart problems, and my mama has Alzheimer's. And so it happened, you know, you are taking care of them, but you don't think of being their caregiver, and all of a sudden it's there. And again, as I'm trying to think of, you know, I'm right now, how old am I? I'm almost 58. So, I mean, but again, you're starting to think about those things, you know, about your retirement, about your grandkids, about your job, your living conditions. And all of a sudden, you're forced into this role as caregiver, and it's how do you balance all of this? And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to be able to help women ease into those roles or ease into that phase in their life, but also to help them and help the caregiver stay healthy and their quality of life stay up, because it is a huge challenge. And again, I watched it from the outside of being involved with our Office on Aging for many years and listening to the caregiver stories, but you do not know what it's like until you are in that situation. And I'm honored and blessed that I have the opportunity to do that. But again, it does create many challenges for us.
Aside, if I may add, aside from my mom, the most, one of my mentors is my nonna, my grandmother, is be 100 this year. Again, really excited about that. But she cared for me as a kid growing up, and my mom and dad would drop me off in the summer, and I'll never forget when we would walk to the neighborhood deli, and then we would walk to Anderson Senior Center, where we would play bingo together. I was 5 years old. This was 40 years ago, Karen. And I still remember that to this day. We would play bingo. We would go on bus trips. And those are the types of programming that we still need to lead and embrace and fund. In Los Angeles, we have a city-county partnership, a Purposeful Living Los Angeles initiative. It's a 5-year plan that focuses on empowerment, engagement, workforce development, infrastructure, housing. These are we are focused on providing those types of resources for women. In Los Angeles, we've also experienced that we have a large number of homeless women who are living in encampments in our sidewalks, who are struggling with domestic violence and sex trafficking. And we, when we talk about the importance of solving homelessness and housing affordability, we cannot ignore the fact that a lot of women are in that space and are struggling with the issues of housing instability.
But you're also seeing grandparents take on the role of parenting their grandchildren. And it is a increasing number every single year. And so again, whatever the circumstances are behind that, you then are, like through our Office on Aging every year, we just get this influx of calls of needing help for whether it be their being able to take care of themselves because now their dollars are going towards raising their grandkids. But again, you're going to see that continually increase because of, again, the rising age group.
Right. So I lied. I think we only have time for maybe one question or maybe two questions. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I think we have a couple in the front here. We'll come around with a mic.
Thanks for doing this. Bill Cunningham, Creative Investment Research. So in your roles at the National League of Cities and the counties and also Chicago Urban League, I'm interested in what you think about opportunity zones, the opportunity zones program out of this administration.
So I would be the first to indicate that I think that opportunity zones were one of the best things to come out of the tax bill. And I wasn't a fan of the bill. The thing is to be prepared, and this is from the city perspective, to take advantage of that so that you won't have investors who will just come in and cherry pick, if you will. They'll come in and really partner with local folks to create meaningful opportunities, because the whole idea is not to create an opportunity solely for the investor, but it's also to create growth, to create more wealth in communities. And so at the Urban League, we are focused on that opportunity, if you will, in that we are saying we can partner you with good ideas that are in the opportunity zone that will be meaningful for you as an investor, but also meaningful for you as a community. The mayors have done the same thing through their perspectives because they understand sort of the positive aspect and the perils of it.
The National League of Cities Community Economic Development Committee has embraced opportunity zones with some of those concerns as well that Karen alluded to. I can tell you in my district in the city of Los Angeles, I was one of the first projects that was financed through an opportunity zone that is focused on housing, and the second one is coming in my district. But when we talk about planning, future planning, and even talking about inclusionary zones focused on affordable housing, we as city leaders, county leaders should put an inclusionary zone for senior housing and demand developers who are bringing housing into our respective cities to put set aside a certain percentage for senior housing. I can tell you again through personal experience that my parents, my dad's 74 and my mom's 68, they were looking at a local retirement home, Little Sisters of the Poor in my hometown. And there's a 20-year wait to get into that site.
Yeah.
So are we prepared as city leaders to address that issue and of senior housing and demand more senior housing being built in our cities, towns, and villages throughout the country?
Well, I think that's about all the time we have, but thank you so much for this conversation. I learned so much, and I'm sure the audience did as well. Thank you.